with the scent of potpourri, films we commit to memory. Crossing the felt ropes, watching from home on my TV, looking at all my eyes can see. They tell me I view obsessively.
Hello and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a weekly podcast that reviews one or two new release titles every episode, with an occasional free-for-all segment at the end that we call Potpourri. You can find more of our work, including my written reviews, full episode show notes, and the complete backlog of our episodes at obsessiveviewer.com. You can also write into the show by emailing me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. Shout out to Donna for sending me an email, and I very much appreciated it. And I promise I'm going to get more anthology episodes out. I promise. I need to get back into that. But yeah, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And if you'd like to support us and get access to hundreds of exclusive episodes and recordings, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get access to content at any of our tier levels on a recurring monthly subscription basis, or you can buy individual collections a la carte in the Patreon shop section. Recently on Patreon, I mentioned last time that I've been doing the for your consideration viewing stuff, so I still have my Patreon Potpourri episode, Patreon Potpourri number 32 for award season 2024, Patreon Potpourri episode 32. Award season is just the thing. Anyway, that reviewed Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, Remembering Gene Wilder, music by John Williams, and The Remarkable Life of Evelyn. I'm currently working on the next installment of Patreon Potpourri. I'm going to be reviewing some animated films, and the first one up is Piece by Piece, which there is a video version of that review up on Patreon now for $5 and $10 patrons. And then later, when it's compiled into Patreon Potpourri, it'll be available to all paid members. Elsewhere on Patreon, I did a Patreon special today that is all about the Alamo Drafthouse that's opening in Indy next week. I went to a media preview event thing and shared my immediate thoughts about it. I'm going to be talking about that later in this episode too, but if you want to hear my immediate thoughts on the drive home in rush hour traffic, check out Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And finally, on Patreon, Patreon members got early access to this past week's bonus episode with Kim C from the Year of Underrated Stephen King, and they currently have early access to the bonus episode that's going to be going up on Sunday. So that is on Patreon, and then finally, just today also, Patreon supporters got access to an immediate reaction of A Real Pain. It was a spoiler discussion that Tiny and I had after we saw it. It was my second time seeing the movie. It was his first time seeing the movie, and I am pretty sure it's going to be his movie of the year, just as was foretold by me. So once again, you can sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer for all of that stuff that I just rambled about and a bunch more content. There is, I think, almost 800 pieces of content on Patreon, and you get access to all of it when you sign up on the tier levels. So check it out. Once again, that's at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. By the way, I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and you can find me on social media, including Letterboxd, at obsessiveviewer. And later in the show, I'm going to be reviewing the Netflix sci-fi horror movie Time Cut, which I know I said I was going to be reviewing Anora as the secondary review, or actually I said the primary review or the feature review, but that time just kind of fell away from me. So later in the show, I'm going to be reviewing Time Cut, and before that, I'll be going over some movie news, and I will be sharing those aforementioned thoughts on the new Alamo Drafthouse, and then, and only then, will I review the new religious horror film Heretic, which is currently in theaters, in this week's feature review, which will be a non-spoiler and spoiler review with timestamps to separate the spoilers. Now, ordinarily, if you haven't guessed now at this point. Ordinarily, I have a co-host or a guest joining me on the podcast, but tonight I'm doing a solo episode. Such is the way things go occasionally here at The Obsessive Viewer, but I do recommend checking out the film criticism work of my friends on their various outlets, MidwestFilmJournal.com, AwakeInTheDark.com, OddTrilogies.com, all the .coms. Check out what they've been doing. And speaking of OddTrilogies.com, if you're listening to this day of release, which I'm crossing my fingers I get this posted on the day of release on Friday, a day late, but hopefully not $1 short. But if you're listening to this on Friday, tomorrow, on Saturday, the next episode of Odd Trilogies is going to drop, and that episode is going to feature me. I was a guest on Odd Trilogies, and that episode is finally coming out, and that episode is all about Akira Kurosawa, one of my all-time, if not my all-time favorite filmmaker. We did they had me on to do an episode about Shakespeare adaptations by Kurosawa. So we reviewed Throne of Blood, is it The Bad Sleep Well? I think I get that confused with High and Low for some reason. And then Ron as well. So that was such a blast. I'm so excited for that episode to come out. And I'm so excited for people to listen to it. So go check out Odd Trilogies. Go check out me talking about Kurosawa on Odd Trilogies, and subscribe to their show because they do a great job. And I'm hoping to have both Andy and Logan on the podcast in the future at any point, really, because it's just a blast to talk to them. So, with that out of the way, I do have a somewhat abbreviated or truncated, whatever you want to call it, a different style of playing this week in indie segment, the segment that I've been doing the last few weeks or so, where I kind of go through the different theaters in the Circle City in Indianapolis, and sharing what is on the schedule at those theaters, which I'm sure everyone who's not local to Indianapolis really loves that section of the podcast. But this one is going to be a little bit shorter because of that media preview that I attended for Alamo Drafthouse. But before I get to that, though, I do want to share that The Waiting Game, the documentary that I saw at Heartland that I interviewed the filmmaker Michael Hussein about a month ago, it is having a special fundraiser screening at Indian Lake Country Club. So I'll put a link in the show notes and everything, but the press release or the social media post is, you're invited to join us on November 21st from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. for an exclusive screening of The Waiting Game, an award-winning documentary by award-winning filmmaker Michael Hussein, hosted by ILCC, the Indian Lake Country Club. This feature film reveals the incredible story behind the ABA/NBA merger and its financial impact on ABA players, spotlighting our Indiana Pacers in a pivotal moment in basketball history. So this is a free screening at Indian Lake Country Club on November 21st from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And cast members will be there. There's going to be Q&A, photo ops, a bunch of stuff. They're also going to have hors d'oeuvres, courtesy of John Dewey and Kimberly Stewart Dewey during the movie. So there is a link to get free tickets. I'll put a link in the show notes of this episode. I highly, highly, highly recommend going to see The Waiting Game if you have a free schedule, are in the area, and are wanting to check out an incredible documentary about an important topic and finding ways to help. There was such an energy. I think I talked about it with Michael in the interview, but there was such an energy after that screening that I went to, the world premiere screening at Heartland, where everyone in the audience, like immediately everyone was like, what can we do to help? What can we do to get things right, to make things right? And like, that is such an indicator of powerful filmmaking and successful filmmaking and successful storytelling. So that's my pitch to go see The Waiting Game. Go see it at Indian Lake Country Club on November 21st. You won't regret it. And let me know what you thought when you do see it. So I'm so excited that I got a chance to see that and that I saw that. it was popping up there. So check it out. Link in the show notes for free tickets to the screening. And so the other thing I'm going to talk about with around Indy is Alamo Drafthouse. Like I've been alluding to in the early parts of this episode, Alamo Drafthouse, it again opens on Monday, this coming Monday, November 18th. And you can get tickets right now. They're on sale. They're playing in their first week. They're playing Anora, Red One, The Substance, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4K Restoration, Howl's Moving Castle. And today I went to Alamo Drafthouse for a special media preview where they had members of local media kind of tour the theater, and we got to see a movie as well. So I'm going to share my thoughts on that. So Alamo Drafthouse has this reputation. Like Alamo Drafthouse is like this, it's not like a mecca thing or anything, but it's like, I believe it started in Austin, Texas. It's this big chain now that has a bunch of different things. It's one of those like hybrid, like restaurant movie theaters where you can kind of order food and have it delivered to your seat. And they play a lot of like repertory screenings and special screenings, and they very famously have a no talking policy, no cell phone policy, which is very, very exciting for me because I hate having my movie theater experience disrupted by people who don't know how to properly exist in the world around other people. So that has me very interested in this. And like there are other... In Indianapolis, there are other like movie theaters designed like this, like Flicks Brewhouse in Carmel, which I've talked about before. I haven't been there, but it has the same model. The former, there was a movie theater that unfortunately closed down. Its Studio Movie Grill has the same setup. Order food to your seat, get refills and stuff to your seat, that kind of thing. I believe those things, they all come from Alamo Drafthouse. Alamo Drafthouse, I don't know if they were the first ones to do it, but they were the most popular ones to do it. And the other places that have done it here have kind of followed their suit, followed their kind of lead. It's to the point of just basically ripping off their business model, which, it is what it is. Competition breeds innovation and all of that nonsense. But it's just really nice to me. I like the idea that we are getting Indianapolis, the little like plucky upstart of Indianapolis is getting an Alamo Drafthouse. Like, I feel like that alone, like we have incredible theaters in this city that have come up, and I've talked about it in the Heartland episodes and everything, but we have incredible theaters that have popped up and have been like flourishing over the years in Indianapolis. And it's such a great reflection of the power of the arts community in Indianapolis, the power of the film community in Indianapolis, and the growth of it as well. So I'm not going to I'm not saying like, oh, this is a first for Indianapolis. This is just like the next step for Indianapolis is to get an Alamo Drafthouse. And it kind of, I don't want to say it legitimizes like the film community in Indianapolis, but there's a level to it that feels like it's something that feels like a little bit of a triumphant victory for the city that, yeah, we're getting an Alamo Drafthouse. We're like, yeah, like we're getting an Alamo Drafthouse. One of our biggest film festivals has been voted like the coolest film festivals on the coolest film festivals list and everything. We're getting a lot of stuff. So it's just really cool that we get something as high profile as an Alamo Drafthouse. So with all of that preamble out of the way, what did I think of Alamo? What did I think? So this theater has 13 screens. The first thing that kind of caught my eye, and I'm going to hopefully do like a video for YouTube and social media and stuff, because I did film a bunch of stuff. I recently got an iPad and I've been kind of using that with the idea that I'm going to do more film festival stuff and more interview stuff with film festivals, and I'm going to use that as the thing. So I kind of use this media preview at Alamo Drafthouse as a kind of a testing ground, a dry run for that kind of thing. So I took a bunch of videos. I'll probably do like a voiceover thing, one of those really kind of lame YouTube videos that you see. But there's some footage there that'll be fun. But anyway, Alamo Drafthouse. It is on Lafayette Road, Lafayette and Georgetown, which I said this on Patreon, but people kind of get a little bit, and I think I may have been guilty of this when it was announced, but like they get a little bit like, oh, that's a bad area. That's not a great area. I wish it was somewhere else. And like, I've softened up to that, because that whole area, if you're in Indianapolis, like that whole area is being redeveloped. Like there's a lot, like it's not a bad area. And I made the joke on Patreon that it's not a bad area. You're just white and you live in Carmel, because there's this like level of possible like racist sort of thoughts in terms of it, even if it's not intentionally racist, it's like kind of sort of racist. But that's a non-factor for me. That's a non-factor for me. I just wanted to kind of point that out. But the actual facility, the actual building is beautiful. Like the thing that kind of struck me the most by it is that they are 100% embracing the auto racing fixation of Indianapolis. They're 100% embracing this, the Indy 500 thing. Like there's like an arcade with like Mario Kart and like an actual like IndyCar racing simulator thing that's like a full on. It's incredible. It's actually incredible. And I believe that it's like it's a simulation of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But throughout the hallways leading to the theaters, there's a bunch of posters of like race related movies, including the Sylvester Stallone movie, Driven, with Kip Pardue, I think, and Gina Gershon, I think. I remember seeing that on like HBO when I was a kid. Yeah, and I haven't revisited it since. So I don't know how well it holds up, but there's a lot of like classic movies and current movies that are on display there. A lot dealing with like racing themes. So it's really cool. And they have like a full bar that has, I think, like 32 beers on tap. And the theater design is great. Like, I will say this, the seats at the Alamo Drafthouse are probably the most comfortable seats I've sat in a movie theater. Like Imagine Theaters, which I haven't been to in Noblesville, the Alamo Drafthouse theater seats they fully recline and they have heated seats. And those heated seats have 3 different levels, so you can adjust the heating setting on it. 13 screens with a 14th being built, I believe. And they do have a VIP screening room that is kind of incredible. We didn't get to see any movie. Like they did screen a movie for us, but we didn't screen it in that theater. But that theater has like these incredible like dark drapes, like extra drapes along the sides for like kind of this total immersion effect where it's going to be very, very dark. It's going to be very pitch black dark, and they have tons of speakers around it. So like the selling point of it is that this is the VIP area where a lot of people are going to, like, it's going to be an incredibly immersive place. And it's also going to be an area of the theater where they do a lot of private events and like rentals for screening rentals and everything. And they have like a separate offshoot in that theater that's like this lounge area that is like wood paneled mirrors, and it's just like a seating in there for like drinks and like socializing. It's really great. It's really great. And I'm very, very curious to see what a movie in that specific screen experience is going to be like, because it's not like a Dolby screen, it's not like an IMAX screen, but it is very much like the amount of speakers in that room were astonishing. So and very, very much something that I am looking forward to checking out. So the actual way, if you're not familiar with Alamo Drafthouse, they went viral several years ago because a woman had called and left them a voicemail to complain because she got kicked out of the theater. I don't know if that was fully real. I don't know if that was staged for promotional sakes or anything, which it could have been, but I'm fine with that if it was, because it was effective. But basically the whole point of that is that Alamo Drafthouse has a 0 tolerance, or I guess maybe 1 tolerance policy for talking and disrupting the movie experience. So the way that it works is, first of all, you can order food to your seat. And the way that works is that they have menus. They have like little cards that you write on the card what you want, your order. You put it on the tray, and then you press a button, and then someone comes, takes the card, gets your order, brings it to you, and you eat and you enjoy the movie without disruption. That's how you also do refills and all of that. But if someone in the theater is disrupting your experience and is disruptive and using their phone, doing whatever, you can also use the card to rat them out and press the button. They will come in, see it, and then they will give the person one warning. They will give them one warning, and if they get another warning, they are kicked out of the theater and they will not get a refund. That is kind of the bread and butter of Alamo Drafthouse, and I am so happy that is going to be carried over into Alamo Drafthouse in Indianapolis, because that is something that I think every theater should do no matter what. Like, it's just something that should be done, because people need to learn to just not be dicks in the movie theater. That's the long and short of it. So the building is incredible. The design, the decorum is incredible. They have, a lot of memorabilia and like merchandise and like branded merchandise from studios and movies, for sale. I'm very hopeful that this is going to be a very cool, interesting place to spend time and to see movies in. They also have every Tuesday, the tickets are $7. They also have their own version of like a movie pass deal or A-list deal that is called Alamo Season Pass, where you can see one movie a day for $19.99 a month. So $20 a month, one movie per day. And I don't remember if they said if there were any restrictions on that. I think there maybe were restrictions on specialty screenings. I'm not sure. You might need to be upcharged for that, but the bottom line is it's $20 a month, one movie per day, which is tempting, but I'm an A-list boy, and I unfortunately I live much closer to AMC than I do to Alamo. So but yeah, and I'm trying to think of anything else. They did screen us the 2013 Ron Howard movie Rush, which was appropriate because of auto racing. And I'll talk about it briefly as a kind of a pseudo potpourri section here. As far as the actual theater experience was concerned, it was great. It was fantastic. The sound was great. The projection was incredible. It looked really good. The movie itself doesn't it looks good, but it looks stylized in a way. That's a Ron Howard thing. That's also the cinematographer thing. But the actual experience was fantastic, and I'm very, very eager to see more movies in that theater. Because I'm just so excited. I'm excited for other people to go to Alamo and other people to experience what the place has to offer. But as far as Rush is concerned, I liked it. It was fine. I watched it in 2014 for the first time, and now it's 10 years later, and I still like it. I think I liked it a little bit more in 2014 than I did in 2024. Obviously, like, if you're not familiar, Rush, well, obviously you could not be familiar. I don't know. But if you're not familiar with Rush, it is a 2013 auto racing rivalry movie starring Chris Hemsworth and Daniel Bruhl as two competing Formula One race car drivers in the 70s, who are kind of at odds with each other and trying to compete for the world championship of Formula One racing. And there is a lot to like about it. Apparently there's a lot of artistic license used. So, like, I guess they weren't necessarily like rivals from the outset. Like they were roommates at one point, I guess, but that's not something in the movie. But but the thing that kind of stands out to me is the way that Ron Howard is able to capture how terrifying it is to be like in like the terrifying idea of auto racing. And what I mean by that is just, especially Formula One racing, it is death-defying. It is horrifying. It is something that they're like Daniel Bruhl's character. These are real people too, but Daniel Bruhl's character says that like every time he gets in the car, there's a 20% chance that he'll die, and that comes through really well. Like that level of potential death and also fear is captured really well. And the way that he captures that is through the perspective of the drivers. Like there are sequences where Daniel Bruhl or Chris Hemsworth are in the thick of it in a race, and like visibility is low, and you see their perspective and you see how hazardous that perspective is, how hazardous and unclear that experience is. And I think that that's a really, really good way to demonstrate how dangerous it is. Some of the downsides of it is that the characterization is pretty light. Like I really wish that there was a little bit more to the character dynamics. It's just kind of a straightforward kind of rivalry and mutual respect storyline, which isn't bad. It's not bad. It just doesn't do anything interesting with it. It doesn't really delve into it with any kind of detail or anything like that. It's just really kind of, it's just a little light on that. And the supporting characters are kind of, I'll hesitate to say one note, but they are very much not as fully developed as they should be. And the final thing I'll say about Rush is that there's some very interesting stylistic choices and very interesting cinematography choices, some very interesting camera placement choices. All of that kind of blends together to create this sort of graded or, I guess graded filmic effect on the film, on the actual like presentation. And a lot of it also deals with like, there's some visibility issues, like this kind of washed out kind of display of like wide displays of like the crowds at the, I almost said stadiums, at the racetracks. Like it looks very washed out. Now I don't know how exactly to describe it, but it looks very ethereal in a sense. And it doesn't really work that well. And I think it worked well for me in 2014 as an interesting stylistic choice. But here it just feels like a little bit discombobulating, a little bit confusing to an extent, and just a little bit ugly. That's the kind of bottom line, is that it just kind of looks ugly. So that's a shame. But it was cool seeing it at Alamo Drafthouse, but it was just kind of an okay experience overall. I don't know when the next time I'll ever see this movie is. Probably never, to be honest. But I enjoyed seeing it when I did today. So yeah. So that is Alamo Drafthouse. That is all I've got to say about that. I'll have more to say the more I see movies there, but I'm actually really excited about that because especially on Tuesdays, Tuesdays being $7 there. I mean, I work in my day job. I work in the office on Tuesdays. Like, it's not a bad drive going from downtown Indianapolis to the Alamo. Like, I could leave work and go to the Alamo and see a movie and then go home. Like, that might be something I do on Tuesdays. We'll see. But, and then I'll also have, my AMC A list. So I'm covered pretty well with movies here in movie theaters here in Indianapolis. It's an embarrassment of riches, and I'm very glad to add Alamo Drafthouse to another one of those riches that we have here in Indianapolis. So check out Alamo Drafthouse when it opens November 18th. That's this coming Monday. And yeah, that's all I've got for what's going on in Indianapolis in terms of film and film community stuff. I do want to touch on a couple of news items before I get into my featured review tonight. And I'm just going to kind of rapid fire through this. First things first, unfortunately, news broke over the weekend that actor Tony Todd passed away at the age of 69. He leaves behind a legacy that's it's incredible, like obviously Candyman and a bunch of stuff that he's done. But I wanted to kind of highlight Final Destination. Like, he had like an incredible cameo in Final Destination. I think he appeared in one or two other installments of it, but he was actually in the his likeness was used in the third one, I think, where it's the carnival ride. Like, his voice and his like image was used to be like the demon of the ride that they go on the outside of it, which I think is such an interesting and cool tribute that they did there in, I think it was Final Destination 3. So I just want to highlight Final Destination. It was one of those formative movies for me around the time where I was starting to, become a movie fan and everything. And Tony Todd's like scene in it is just, it's so chilling and uneasy and also uneasy kind of experience for a movie. He also had the distinction of being one, I think the only, or maybe one of only like two or three actors actors with lines basically to appear on the TV series 24 as two different characters. In season 3, he played a detective in season 3, and then he played like a warlord in season 7 or 8, I think. So that's interesting. So rest in peace to Tony Todd. I'm sure more people have much better eulogies for him and everything, but yeah, he leaves behind a legacy, and I recommend checking out Tony Todd performances, like bigger ones than the ones that I've talked about. So yeah, that is the first piece of news. The next piece of news I have is that, so I'm a huge fan of Mass Effect, the Mass Effect franchise of video games. It is maybe my favorite video game franchise. It's incredible. I love it. The Mass Effect trilogy is some of the best science fiction I've ever experienced, across any medium. The Mass Effect TV series that's been in the works at Amazon, it got a little bit more notice. Like, I think it was just because it was like N7 Day, which is November 7th. N7 is like a class of soldier in the Mass Effect universe, but every November 7th, it's like N7 Day for Mass Effect. And every year for the past several years at this point, it's been like, well, here's a little snippet of something we're working on for the future. And it's like, and I'm just like, every time I see anything, I'm like, okay, whenever that comes out, I'm going to waste a ton of money getting like whatever that generation of console like video game system is and play that game. But it hasn't come out yet. Like, it's not, it's going to be years. But this year, for N7 Day, they talked about how it is still in the works at Amazon to have a TV series adaptation of Mass Effect. And there is going to be one of the people, like, it's billed as saying that like a writer from Fast and Furious 9 is going to be working on it. And that's kind of a misnomer. I'll just read the Variety article. Daniel Casey is set to write and executive produce the adaptation. Kareem Zreik will executive produce under his Cedar Tree banner, productions banner, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I don't know. So this is really a nothing piece of news. I'm just going to talk about it because I want it to happen. Like, I'm only giving it voice in this podcast episode because I want this to actually happen. So Mass Effect TV series in the works at Amazon. We'll see what happens. They've got a lot of stuff going on at Amazon, including the Dark Tower series from Mike Flanagan. So hopefully something I love gets made into a TV series at Amazon. Like, that's all I want. That's just all I want. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes if you want to read the non-news of it. In wrapping up the news segment for this episode of The Obsessive Viewer, Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. The trailer came out, and yes, they have a new name. So if you guys remember, a couple years ago, Dead Reckoning Part 1 came out, which was supposed to be the first part of a two-part kind of supposedly finale movie experience for Mission Impossible, at least for Tom Cruise in the Mission Impossible franchise. And then I don't remember if it was because of poor performance for Dead Reckoning Part 1, but they were like, yeah, we're not going to make a Part 1. The next movie is going to be titled something different. So I think it kind of like retroactively changed on the digital release to just Dead Reckoning. And I've got to say, Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, I like that title a lot. I like it a lot. And I think it's a good mark of the franchise as a whole, that as much as I was disappointed with Dead Reckoning, the trailer for The Final Reckoning looks really cool. Like, I think this is a franchise that I'll just like. I will see the installments as they come out, and I will hopefully enjoy them. If not, I will talk about how disappointing it is. But no matter what, I think that this is this trailer looks really good. So there's a lot of footage with the kind of old style, like biplanes, I think. Very colorful, and just obviously Tom Cruise, basically potentially putting himself at risk for our entertainment. So he's a weird guy in his private life, but man, he is an entertainer. So movies and popcorn and movies. So I'm excited for The Final Reckoning. We will be reviewing it on Obsessive Viewer no matter what, I'm sure. I shouldn't really say that, but knock on wood, we will be able to. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm ready to be heard again. So that is Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. I think it comes out like next summer. I didn't put down the release date, and I very much apologize for that, because that is something that I, as your intrepid podcast host, should have had in the bag here in my notes. It comes out May 23rd, 2025. We'll see if that release date holds, but May 25, 23, I already forgot it. May of 2025, we will be talking about Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. And I'll put a link to the trailer in the show notes of this episode. And let's get into the featured review of the evening. So, of course, if this is your first time listening, we do a featured review. The feature review will have a non-spoiler section that I'll start out with, and then I will transition into a spoiler section where I will be spoiling the movie. But worry not, I will play a clip from the trailer to signal that I'm going to go into spoilers, and I will also put timestamps in the show notes of this episode, which can be found at obsessiveviewer.com/OV451. And in your podcast app and everything. But I will put timestamps in there, so if you want to just listen to the non-spoiler review of Heretic and skip over to the next review, you have the tools at your disposal to do that. So let me get started with my review of Heretic. And of course, going to do non-spoiler first, as I have said previously in this episode. Some background first. Heretic is currently in theaters. It was released in theaters on November 8th, 2024. The premise, according to IMDb, is two young religious women are drawn into a game of cat and mouse in the house of a strange man. Writers and directors for this movie were Scott Beck and Brian Woods, who were the co-writers of the first A Quiet Place movie, which is interesting because I feel like there's like a controversy surrounding that, where it's kind of like John Krasinski is sort of using, like, is sort of taking credit for writing A Quiet Place when it's really these guys, and it's a little muddy there. But he's also apparently the sexiest man alive now, so who knows. There was also something I saw about that where it was like he paid to be named the like Variety or whatever their sexiest man alive, specifically so that, to help improve his image or what have you in Hollywood. I don't know if that's the case or not, or that was just a cynical post or whatever, but I don't know. But anyway, worth mentioning that Scott Beck and Brian Woods were the co-writers of the first A Quiet Place movie, and they also have some other credits and everything, but I kind of wanted to highlight A Quiet Place, especially if there was any sort of underhanded dealings surrounding that. The cast for this movie includes, it's a pretty sparse cast, but it includes Hugh Grant, Sophie Thatcher, Chloe East, and Topher Grace, who I did not recognize in this movie. But at first I think when he's only in a couple of scenes, but when I first saw him, I was like, wait, it kind of looks like Topher Grace, but not, I wonder who it is. So let me talk in kind of a broad, non-spoiler review of Heretic. I really enjoyed it. And I kind of want to talk about why I enjoyed it and why I think this is an interesting time for religious-based horror movies. Like, religion and horror has been part of horror since the inception of horror, basically. And like, it's always been something that's kind of been explored in the horror genre. So I'm not saying that Heretic breaks any ground, like, oh my God, this movie is a horror movie about religious zealotry and about religious faith and disbelief and whatever. It's not that. What it is an interesting reflection and a further reflection of kind of the state of discourse about like religion and belief systems. And what I mean by that is Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant gives an incredible performance. He is creepy. He is unsettling. He's unnerving. He has this temperament to him that is just like this seething, not even disdain or anything, but it's just like this seething danger. Like, he is a dangerous presence that it's immediately clear that it's dangerous for these two young women. But it's really, really kind of unsettling from the jump, because he has this kind of faux niceness, this false sort of like polite pleasantry to him, while he's also kind of like getting at the meat of like what it is to be a person of faith. And that's what I'm getting at as to why I really like this movie, because we have, like, this year alone, we've had some interesting religion-based horror movies, such as The First Omen, such as Immaculate. This is not, I wouldn't necessarily say similar to those movies, because there's not like an Immaculate Conception or anything like that, or pregnancy. But it's in an interesting vein, because this movie explores what it means to be someone who is not of a faith, not someone who has like a belief system, or someone who is trying to piece together a belief system. And I'll stop beating around the bush. Basically, Hugh Grant's character of Mr. Reed is a person who feels like he is written as your standard Reddit commenter person. Like, he is someone that I feel is so fallible in this movie, and he is so flawed, but it's so interesting because he is someone who the character seems to be a product of the kind of like religious deconstruction that I went through. Like, not that I was religious or anything, but like, I read all of the like new atheism books. I read like the essays and everything of people that like were deconstructing faith and like exploring like those ideas of like, what does it mean to not be part of a faith-based system? What is it like? What are the inconsistencies with religion and with organized religion? What are the issues presented there? I read tons of those books in my 20s. Like most of like the people I know in their 20s, they read those and thought, oh my God, this is the most incredible thing ever, because I never knew that this is something that could be the thing. So I don't know. It's interesting to see a movie depict the obnoxious side of that, the kind of like forgive the pun, holier than thou persona of like the new atheist, the new age, but not like new atheism person who is like basically red pilled for atheism, where they are like, I know that there's no God, so you are not allowed to believe in God because I know that there's no God, even though that's kind of an impossibility. But it's something that's just really interesting to see depicted here in terms of this kind of the way it breeds this danger within this person. And the movie explores that in some really interesting ways. And, but that's not really the sole part of the movie. Like, the most effective and interesting thing about this movie is, I'm not going to spoil it or anything, but I will say, when I looked at my phone at one point and I was thinking like, okay, well, we're about like 30 minutes into the movie. We're about 45 minutes into the movie. It had been like over an hour and probably like hour and 10 minutes since the start of the movie. And I was so surprised because I was so engaged with what this movie was in that first hour and 10 minutes. And what I mean by that is it's just these three people talking. It's these two Mormon like missionaries who arrive at this man's house, and he invites them in and they have a conversation about faith. And it is just this interesting, like kind of like interesting dichotomy among these three people. So there's Hugh Grant, Mr. Reed. There's Sophie Thatcher as Sister Barnes and Chloe East as Sister Paxton. So what I found so effective in terms of the writing for this movie was that like Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton are two different girls. They're two different women who they approached their faith and their missionary work in different ways. So Sister Barnes is the more like seasoned missionary person who has done this missionary work, done this thing where she's trying to get people saved and trying to get people baptized. So she has like this kind of bedrock within her of like, yes, my faith, like I'm a knowledgeable person about my faith. And when she's challenged in that, she challenges back. She pushes back. Sister Paxton, on the other hand, is kind of a fresh face to this world or to this experience of trying to be to proselytizing to people and everything. And because of that, she has this like reserved nature to her in this kind of shyness. And the combination of those two styles of conversation basically come through in such an interesting way, because as Hugh Grant starts picking away at their faith, starts picking away at their belief system, it's so interesting to see the different responses from Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes. So Sister Barnes, she will say things like, well, you brought up this point and you neglected to include this point, or you neglected to include this, coming to the conclusion that he's full of shit. And Sister Paxton is more like supplicant. She's more like, well, she's like, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and everything, but we should be going. Like, she's very much like, even though he is getting to the point where he's ramping up to attack their faith in a sense, or to basically challenge their goodness, their inherent goodness, their belief system, all of that, she is one to be like, you're right. Yeah. Like, just telling him what he wants to hear to get him to let them go. And it's such an interesting way to have like these two almost opposites of like viewpoints of challenged belief systems and everything represented in this movie and explored in such interesting ways. Because it's not that Sister Paxton is a weak character. It's not that she is someone who is experiencing weakness and isn't capable of defending herself or anything. It never comes across as her being not knowledgeable of these things that Sister Barnes is knowledgeable of. It comes across as her just being frightened to challenge a man in her presence and frightened to challenge someone who could cause her harm. So she is just going along with it. And I found that to be so refreshing and interesting in the way that it's depicting this kind of, not even crisis of faith or anything, but this dichotomy that's present in this movie. I think it's a really interesting way to explore like feminist issues as well, but also just like the whole idea of them being challenged by this man, but also being slowly confined by this man is really interesting to me. And that was something I found really fascinating, especially as it pertains to like new age atheism or new like militant atheism, and like the kind of people who are like, hey, fuck you for thinking this, or fuck you for believing this. Here's why you're wrong, when it should just be like, hey, if you're not hurting anyone, if you're not voting against people's rights at everything because of your religion, that's a whole other can of worms that we're looking forward to. If you're not harmful to others, who cares? Who cares what you think and believe? Like there's a whole can of worms there and everything, but it's just really interesting to see this movie explore those themes and explore those ideas in such a constructive and interesting way that goes a long way to kind of just explore a lot of themes of the world that we live in today. And what I also found very refreshing is that while this is going through like the playbook of like new atheism and like all these talking points that people like see on like Reddit and on social media as like from like people who've deconstructed from religion and everything, and it explores this in such an interesting way because Hugh Grant is a very, very flawed character. He is not someone who is in the right much at all. He is confining these women to his house without any hope of them getting out against their will. So that's a whole thing. But what I love is that his convictions, his thoughts, his experience, his viewpoint of things, as he is putting these women through absolute hell and threatening their lives. His position is weak and is fallible. It is very like I said about Sister Barnes challenging him. Those are incredible moments because it is her exposing those flaws in his belief, in his thoughts, in his ideas, in the thing that he has set his entire personality around. And I found that to be so interesting because he is someone who he's presented as someone who's not very capable of like thinking on the fly, or he's not very capable of thinking things through or looking at things from a viewpoint outside of his own. And I think that is such an interesting way to tell a religious horror story, because you get that on so many different ways, so many different levels, so many different sides of the things where, yes, people believe different things, and as long as they're not hurting anyone or, again, voting against people's rights, as long as they are happy and everything, it's fine. Like, it's fine. But what's interesting is that the challenge of that is just it's. I lost track because people are screaming in my apartment building, but yeah, just the way that it's depicted as like no one side is right in this movie, or the way that Hugh Grant is not able to be challenged in his faith or lack of faith, is really, really interesting. And it's a great kind of deconstruction and depiction of what these conversations are, like what these even like the more militant and like vitriolic conversations on either side, on any side, the way that they play out in online forums and trash like that is really, really interesting. And it's a way to kind of distill it into a horror movie setting. So all of that's like the first like half of the movie, or first 2/3 of the movie, 2/3 of the movie. The movie does kind of lose itself a little bit when it gets really into the really to like the really dangerous parts of the movie, to the actual like horror elements of the movie. It kind of loses its feet a little bit, and I think that partially that's because the actual story is not that strong. Like the points that it gets to are not that strong, which I'll talk about in spoilers. But also, it's something that's not I think it's also a reflection of how strong the dialogue is in the first part of the movie, that it doesn't carry it through with a strong finale. So like those conversations that the characters have and that slow building tension of those conversations is incredible. It's fantastic. It's wonderful. It's amazing. And then when we get to kind of the meat of the horror element of this movie, it kind of flounders a little bit. It kind of loses its footing and doesn't really recover in a meaningful way that is a reflection of the strength of the dialogue in the first part of the movie. So that's about all I'll say in non-spoilers without, going into depth with the spoilers and everything. I'll be like, that's my vague non-spoiler thoughts on the ending and everything. But I do kind of wish that it would have done something more. I don't know how they could have resolved itself in a meaningful way that would have been a good reflection of the themes and the strength of the dialogue in the first part of the movie. But the way that it resolves itself here just kind of feels a little bit not like there's some really interesting thought-provoking things, but I feel like they're not as interesting and thought-provoking as they could have been. So that's my non-spoiler review for Heretic. I ended up rating it 4 stars on Letterboxd. So like it's a 4-star movie out of 5. Like for me, that's pretty strong. That's pretty great. So forget what all the complaints I have. Like see it. It's really good. I really enjoyed it. I thought that it's better than The First Omen and Immaculate. I will go on record and say that. As far as studio like religious horror movies are concerned, it's better than both of them. It's a lot better than The Exorcist Believer for sure. So it's a very strong entry in this kind of religious horror subgenre of horror. And it's an interesting reflection of the dialogue of the time we live in, for better or worse, or what have you. So that is my non-spoiler review of Heretic. I'm going to go ahead and go into spoilers, but first I'm going to play a clip from the trailer for the movie. If you don't want to be spoiled on Heretic, go ahead and check the show notes for timestamps to jump to the next review. But if not, just hang tight, listen to this clip from the trailer, and when I come back, I will be spoiling Heretic.
I think that we're being studied.
It will make your hearts beat faster. It may even make you want to die. Do not be afraid. You will witness a miracle.
Okay, so spoilers on for Heretic. So I want to say, first of all, this whole idea of Hugh Grant having this hubris of thinking that he is someone who can facilitate a resurrection miracle is so it's done very well. Like that alone, that itself is really interesting. And I will say, I need to get this off my chest. Throughout this entire movie, all I kept thinking was, once it kind of reveals that he is, he's doing this thing to try to resurrect someone, to prove a miracle to someone, like the way that it is, like him murdering someone and then her being resurrected, the way it's presented, all I kept thinking was, God damn, I wish that Mike Flanagan could have done Revival. I really wish, because for context, Mike Flanagan had the rights to adapt Stephen King's novel Revival, which it deals with a priest who, or a preacher, who experiences a tragic loss and devotes his life to studying like electricity, and to the point of trying to, not really bring someone back to life, but to transport someone to the afterlife to see what's on the other side. And it has just the most horrifying imagery in its climax I've ever read in a Stephen King novel. Honestly, it is very visceral and interesting. Maybe not. I don't know. It's up there. But I kept thinking, like, Mike Flanagan had the rights. He was working on adapting it. That fell through, and it eventually, unfortunately, is not happening. But anyway, I kept thinking that, and I'm glad that we got this version to an extent. Because I was into it. I was interested in that because once like Sister Barnes is picking away at his like pitch, his hypothesis, I really liked the way the movie kind of turned from that point. Like the movie created this this kind of narrative shift where he is presenting everything in such an eloquent way. He is presenting their faith as like being iterations of mythology and iterations of things. These are like textbook things from those atheism books, from like deconstruction. Like, yes, the resurrection story is like there's a prophet in every religious text, and they span centuries, and it's like it all leads back to this and that and all that. Like that's all like textbook stuff. And the way that he presents it with such conviction and such vigor is really fascinating and really like something that drew me in. It drew me into the text. It drew me into the story, and the way that he kind of goes back and forth with the two missionaries. I was just so pleased with that. I was incredibly pleased with the way that all played out. And that's why I was so enraptured by it for those first hour and 10 minutes, thinking that it was like a 45 minutes into the movie. But then when the shift comes where Barnes is picking away at his pitch, basically, it becomes this like another layer of an interesting cat and mouse game where he now wants to prove things. Like he is going to, like he's always wanted to prove things, but he's going to prove it. His whole mission is to just disrupt these women's like faith and everything. And then eventually it comes to light that he is an absolutely deranged individual who has pets for his experiments, and like it's disturbing, and that's where it kind of loses its footing a little bit. Like the whole like, you allow me to do this. It's like it feels like that could have been hit a little bit harder, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The actual miracle thing, I was engaged in that. I was interested in it. The makeup effects were terrifying and creepy. That whole side of the movie was really interesting. But then afterwards, it becomes like this game where like Sister Paxton is chipping away at what she has seen. And like, that's fine. That's good. That's decent. But like, she's doing it after like, she's just witnessed this man slit the throat of her friend. And like, she's like doing like a Knives Out detective monologue thing where it's like, well, there's a trap door. There's probably a trap door. And it's like, I don't really need this movie to turn into like this kind of like Hercule Poirot detective story where she's picking apart the things that he has presented to her. Like, I don't really need that. I mean, I guess I do. I think that just the way it was presented was not as interesting as the way that like Sister Barnes picking away at Hugh Grant's whole deal, like his philosophy. It wasn't like that was the engaging part for me for the kind of like picking apart things. But when Sister Paxton is doing it, it just feels a little bit more like, yeah, but your friend is dead right here. You've seen like a dead body. Like I understand the game of cat and mouse, but also get the hell out of there. Like, try to find a way out of there. And she does, and it's successful and everything. That's great. But when they have like their monologue together after, like when she's about to escape or when she's about to stab him, it kind of feels like it lands with a little bit of a thud. Like it doesn't land as well as it should have. And that's a minor quibble from me, I guess. But all that's to say, for the most part, I really enjoyed it. Just it stumbled quite a bit in its ending, and I really wish that it had a stronger ending. And I don't know if, like, I think that there's like there's ambiguity surrounding the ending with the butterfly. Did she see it? Did she not see it? Is she dead? Is she not dead? Like, I don't. It is what it is. But the one thought-provoking thing I'll say, and then I can kind of start wrapping up because I don't know how much more I can say in spoilers about this movie, or what more I have to say in spoilers about this movie. But the one thing I found really thought-provoking that I really wish the movie would have highlighted a little bit more and been a little bit more centering in its finale was Sister Barnes presumably coming back to life. Like, my interpretation of that, because she comes back and she kills Mr. Reed with the like 2x4 with the nails and everything. She comes back and saves her. And it's after she has like bled out. She is like her throat was slit, and like she was dead, and she came back to kill him, and like presumably dies again. And like, that's the resurrection miracle that was promised, that Sister Paxton was to witness. And I think that that's such an interesting way to end the movie, or interesting way to bring us into the end of the movie, because it's doing something that, defies logic. It defies everything. And like, when we're in the face of someone who is putting these women in these trials, in this scenario, to have it actually be something, like, he is full of shit for sure, but to have it actually happen, I feel like that should have been a lot more focused on in the movie. Like, it should have been a bigger like shock moment. And I feel like the movie should have like kind of wrestled with that, or kind of like done something more to follow through on that, as far as it being like an ambiguous, like miraculous thing. But the other thing I want to talk about, that I forgot about, and I'm so glad I remembered, is the IUD. I thought that was brilliant, specifically because Hugh Grant, like I have said, and like it has been said on the internet, Hugh Grant is a Reddit comment writ large. He is a know-it-all, atheist, holier than thou person who wants to destroy the lives of people who believe things, and wants to confront like people of faith, and gets his kicks over telling them that they're wrong. Like I said, he's a Reddit comment writ large. So for him, like, to not only have formidable opponents, especially in the case of Sister Barnes, who challenge his viewpoint and give him extremely clear examples of how he's wrong in his own estimation of things, to then have him so comically get something wrong. Like, I found that to be so interesting, because my interpretation of him digging out the IUD is that he is someone who is so dumb, and like, he is someone who is so wrapped up in his own hubris, his own, the thing that he draws his personality from, his lack of faith, or his know-it-allism about the faith-based communities of the world, especially Mormonism. He is someone who is so wrapped up in that he, on one hand, believes that he can convince anyone of his light, of his truth, of his way. And he's also so dumb that he doesn't know like what an IUD is. And I found that to be so satisfying on a deep level, specifically because of this. This is why I found that to be so interesting, because I believe him. Like, in terms of my own personal like thoughts and everything, yeah, I agree. Like, I think like he brings up some interesting points. There's some interesting points there. Like, this is all stuff that I've read about when I was in my 20s. And I'm like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. Like, I'm not necessarily on his side, but I'm like, yeah, I'm more on his side than I am in their thinking and everything. And so what I kind of love about it is the movie presents this kind of like humbling experience where, yeah, I can have those like thoughts, those beliefs, that he has and holds and everything. But I'm not murdering women. Like, it's humbling in the way that he is so dumb. And he thinks that he can convince others of his thing, that he, like Sister Paxton says, he's a bad improviser. He improvises when things don't go his way. So in order to improvise, he does this thing where he's like, we're actually in a simulation. I need you to kill yourself to prove that you're in a simulation or whatever, to wake up and everything. And it's this weak improvisation that he does, and she calls him out on it. And on one hand, it's like, yeah, I kind of wish that that was a little bit stronger. I wish that was a little bit better. But on the other hand, it's really satisfying that he thinks, in his narrow viewpoint, he thinks that pulling out this dead woman's IUD is proof that this is a microchip and she's a simulation. It's just so interesting because after his viewpoints have been picked away throughout the movie, it's just so funny to see him so laughably get something wrong and so confidently get something wrong. Now, here's the thing. Ask me in 2-4 years how entertaining that is to see someone just get something so wrong so confidently. I might have a different viewpoint because of the political world that we're in now. But in this moment, it was so satisfying and humbling to an extent to see that, yeah, this person who thinks that they know more than others doesn't know shit. It's really, really, it's a really effective way to bring us into kind of the end of the movie. So yeah, so all that told, it was a good movie. Heretic is a good movie, better than The First Omen and Immaculate and The Exorcist Believer, of course. And like I said before, I rated it 4 stars. It's in theaters. I don't think I have anything else to really say about it in spoilers. Except, I mean, Topher Grace is in it for like 2 scenes. That's weird. Like, I don't think nothing ever comes of him. Like, nothing ever comes of that character except for some like manufactured suspense with him knocking on the door, which that was another thing that kind of bugged me, is that when they're trying to get the matches from it, the plans that they had didn't make much sense. So like, they're trying to pull the rug to get the matches while Hugh Grant is in the other room. And like, it's one of those kind of contrived things where it's like, they need to slowly pull the rug, and then he's like, he comes back in the room and then he leaves the room and everything. And it's like the way that it's done, the way that it's shown, it's like the way that the house is laid out, he is of a distance away where he is not going to hear matches slamming against the door. Like, just pull the freaking rug. But also, it doesn't really make much sense. Like, I guess they were trying to smoke him out from like the speaker thing, but I don't know how. It doesn't get to the point where they can, but it's just, it didn't really make sense. So like, when I couldn't really follow it, I was just kind of like, yeah, I don't really get it. I'm like, I don't know. Like, fine, they're not going to be successful, but whatever. Like, we'll see. So yeah, so I don't know. That's a minor complaint, but yeah. So to wind down this review once again, I liked Heretic despite some of its flaws and a shaky third act, a shaky climax, and everything. I despite that, I enjoyed it, and I think that it's really worth seeing, especially for that first hour and a half. Just the way that it plays with, like, deconstructing religion and kind of positing different viewpoints and the way that the women react to it in different ways. It's really interesting as a microcosm of some gender dynamics, as well as religious versus like belief and disbelief and and some interesting concepts at play there. So I think that's it for my review of Heretic. If you've seen it, check it out. Let me know. Let me know what you thought. Again, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. In a world of people not emailing me, be a Donna. Email me. It's cool. Matt@obsessiveviewer.com. So that will do it for this featured review for this episode. Stay tuned for the secondary review, which will start after this note, basically. Okay, and before we get to our secondary review, I want to take a quick moment to remind you that if you like the show, please take a moment to follow us on social media and subscribe to and rate the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or whatever your preferred podcast app is. And don't forget to subscribe to the Obsessive Viewer Podcast YouTube channel as well, where I should hopefully have a video posted about Alamo Drafthouse and my experience there. So check that out, the Obsessive Viewer Podcast YouTube channel. I'm also playing with the idea of getting off of Twitter for good. So follow me on Threads at Obsessive Viewer. And if you're interested in starting a podcast of your own, you can go to Libsyn and use the promo code OBSESS when you sign up for a new account. You'll get up to 2 months free depending on when you sign up during the month, and we'll get a commission on it as well. More details on that are in the show notes of this episode. And finally, I keep forgetting or don't really highlight this that much, but we have merch. We have merch available on TeePublic. We have a TeePublic store, link in the show notes, TeePublic, TeePublic.com. Just search Obsessive Viewer and find merch there with our logos and stuff. It's a lot of fun, and we get money for it, so that's cool. So all right, now back to the show.
They tell me I view obsessively.
20 years ago, my sister and 3 other students were murdered.
Four kids murdered and they never even caught the guy.
I never got to meet my sister. They say you can't change the past, but what if you could?
What is going on?
What's the date?
April 16th?
What year?
Honey, it's 2003.
And for tonight's secondary review, I'm going to share my thoughts on Time Cut, which premiered on Netflix on October 30th, 2024. And the premise, according to IMDb, is a high school student accidentally travels back to 2003 and decides to stop the serial killer who murdered her sister. The movie was directed by Hannah McPherson, and writers were Hannah McPherson and Michael Kennedy. And the cast includes Madison Bailey, Antonia Gentry, Michael Shanks, Griffin Gluck, Megan Best, and Samuel Braun. So obviously first of all, I'm going to do a non-spoiler review. I'm not going to spoil the movie. So if you haven't seen it, feel free to keep listening because I'm not going to spoil it. But basically, this movie obviously shares a very, very similar premise to the Amazon Prime movie that came out a year or two ago called Totally Killer. And it is very similar to that. Totally Killer instead was, I think the character travels back to the 90s, but it's the same premise. Someone that she knew, like friends of her mother, died in the 90s, and she travels back in time and uncovers the truth and everything while having a time displacement thing with culture and all that. And Time Cut is very similar, except it's only 20 years in the past, so she's going back to 2003. It is worth noting that there was a piece of trivia that said that this movie was shot, like the principal photography began on July 6, 2021, which was almost a year before Totally Killer was first announced. So that I thought was interesting to kind of note, because I know with Totally Killer coming out before this, that kind of gets that kind of gets a head start on like who ripped off of who, or who has the original plot line. But something that I did find interesting as well is that, before I get into my actual review and stuff, is that Christopher Landon is a producer on this movie. And I find that interesting because he made the Happy Death Day movies, which are these movies that have these kind of similar like high concept sci-fi premises with slasher trappings to them. And he's kind of become this sort of not gatekeeper, but the kind of person keeping this type of genre storytelling alive or done well, I think. But this movie is not good. It's really, really not good. So that's why I was kind of surprised to see him attached to it, because I would think that with him having at least any type of involvement in the movie, I would have thought that it would have been a little bit more polished and a little better. But unfortunately, there's not much I can say that's kind about this movie, because it was pretty boring. I didn't find myself attached to anything going on in the movie, and that's always a bummer for me, for sure. But it's also really telling about how the movie's made and how the movie is kind of is created. Like, this is a Netflix exclusive teen slasher movie. First and foremost. And what that means is, like, I go into it thinking, well, maybe it'll be something similar to like something like the Fear Street trilogy from a few years ago, which was phenomenal. I loved that trilogy. I loved the release schedule of it. I loved the whole aesthetic of it. And I loved also how the first installment of it is nostalgia bait for 90s people and like 90s kids, the same way that the second installment is kind of really good fodder for slasher, like 80s slasher movies and fans of that stuff. So Netflix already has like a track record showing that they can have a fun, nostalgic fueled slasher movie geared toward a teenage demographic and done well, and especially with some gruesome aspects to it, as Fear Street demonstrated. What Time Cut seems to get wrong right from the jump is that it doesn't feel like it is comfortable or at home being a slasher movie, which it doesn't need to be a slasher movie. Like, you don't need to make a slasher movie, but if you're going to make a movie called Time Cut with a serial killer, like a whodunit serial killer, stabbing his victims and stuff, you need to make it a slasher movie. Like, that's what it is. And my biggest problem with this, one of my biggest problems with this movie, was that it is a slasher movie, but only for like the first, like the opening scene, and then there isn't anything slasher related for another 40 minutes into the movie. So already it's just a jumbled mess in terms of demonstrating what it's like intending to be or intends to be. And then it's muddying the waters by keeping that kind of contained. And then when the slasher stuff comes up, it is incredibly just like completely like low effort. It's kind of very milquetoast sort of slasher things. And it's a very heavily edited movie in the way that I don't know if they didn't shoot enough coverage of the like the big suspenseful like slasher scenes, or if they purposely didn't want it to go too dark or too gruesome. But it is heavily edited. The stabbings, the violence is cut away from, which I can understand, that's fine. But more importantly, the suspense aspect of it is nearly non-existent. There's like one or two scenes that also harken back to other slasher movies that do it better, but that's neither here nor there. But there are one or two slasher scenes that kind of play up that suspense, like having the killer be nearby someone who doesn't know that the killer is near them, and so there's like this suspenseful like build up toward that. That's all great suspenseful slasher filmmaking, but like the opening scene is a depiction in 2003 of a slasher attack from the killer, and there's no build up, there's no tension. It's just like suddenly this character is encountering this person, and you get this kind of just rudimentary chase scene, and then you get the opening title card. It's really, really bland, and that carries throughout the entire movie in terms of the slasher horror aspects of it. And that's something that just really bothered me, because it's that I think that there is such a such a great window into the horror genre for people that are of a certain age, that are of like the youth of America right now, like the youth of the country and of the world right now. They are getting into horror. Like there is gateway horror for people of the next generation. And to do that, I feel like they need to be a little bit better at being gateway horror movies. They need to be better at demonstrating what it is that makes the horror genre and the slasher genre so appealing. And this just isn't it. This is just a movie that has some slasher trappings. And then once we get the reveal about the truth behind who the slasher is and everything, it's unsatisfying. I do give it points for it being not something that I would have guessed, but also the movie isn't a movie that I really was attached to the point where I was trying to guess who the killer was or what the motivation was. That was all just secondary. So as a slasher movie, Time Cut doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. It was very disappointing. There's also one element to it where there's a sequence where the resolution of that sequence is so anticlimactic that when it got to the next scene, which is like the aftermath of that scene where the characters who got away from danger are just talking about how they got away from danger, it comes across as like a little bit of a whiplash, like, oh, okay, so they did escape. There was no like big dramatic moment. It's just like it shows them leaving. It's just like, okay. It was really, really disappointing there. But in other respects, this movie is setting itself up to be kind of hard to be one thing or the other, specifically because it is a sci-fi slasher movie with time travel elements and all of these different high concepts with it. And so it's juggling a lot of things. So the slasher aspect of it didn't work for me, specifically because of all the things I just said. But the other elements of it, like the time travel aspect of it and the family drama aspect of it as well, those elements worked a little bit better for me. Not the time travel stuff too much, but I am a little bit of a harsh critic when it comes to time travel in movies. But the time travel in this movie was just it's just a necessity for the plot. That's really all it is. Like there's a whole MacGuffin where they have to find antimatter, which is just so, I don't know. It's just funny to me. It's just like, we need to break into this lab and steal some antimatter. It's like, okay, let's do it. It's like, it's so weird. But, and it's so matter of fact, and it's such a matter of fact thing. And I'm just like, okay, that's fine. Whatever. Like if you can do that as a MacGuffin and it's fine, I'm not going to think too hard about the time travel mechanics of this movie, but it's also like just so straightforward. And like, there's nothing really making it that much of a struggle for them to do these things and to buy into the idea of time travel. Like one of my all-time favorite movies is Back to the Future. That is like my second favorite movie of all time. And like the genius of that, the brilliance of that movie is that it is throwing all of these different things at the wall and throwing all of these different complications along the way. And add to that the fact that it's a time travel movie. And so that's inherently complicated and inherently a struggle for the character to overcome. And then throwing so many more things at it is just like, it makes it a very, very, very thrilling movie. And I love it for that. And what a movie like Time Cut does when it comes to the time travel element of it is it just simplifies it. And I feel like that is such a mistake because I feel like the intention of it is because it's a time travel movie, so we need to simplify it for the audience. This is geared toward a youthful audience, and they don't have the patience to buy into the time travel elements. Also, this is competing with 2 or 3 different subplots as well that aren't time travel related. So we need to just keep this as short and sweet as we can, which I can understand the logic behind, but I think it is a massive mistake because the whole plot revolves around this high school student, obviously traveling back to 2003 from 2024 and trying to stop a serial killer from killing her sister. That is the plot. The sister is also a teenager in 2003. So basically the teenager was killed in 2003 and then the parents had another kid. And then now, 18 years later, she's traveling back in time. So that presents a very interesting thing. And that's my next point, is that while the time travel element stuff is very rudimentary and very just kind of straightforward and not that interesting, really, the point where this movie works for me is in that familial relationship arena. The whole premise of Lucy, the teenager from 2024, time traveling back to 2003 to save Summer, her sister. Lucy is the present day, Summer is the past. And that element of them meeting and joining together in 2003 is where the movie kind of works best. And because the reason for that is because Summer kind of takes Lucy in, and Lucy spends time with Summer's family, who is Lucy's parents in the future. And what I found so compelling about this movie, not enough to really rate it too high, but like the most compelling aspect of this movie was the way that Lucy interacts with her parents in this state that they're in 2003. This is before Lucy exists. This is before her parents even think about having a second child. It's kind of implied that they had a second child after Summer's death, and Summer's death in 2003 has kind of cast a pall over their entire family. It's a thing where like the town they live in commemorates the deaths of 2003 every year on the same day, and their family does the same thing. They mourn Summer every year, and the first act of the movie is kind of demonstrating that, you know, Lucy is a young girl who is kind of living in the shadow of her dead sister. And she is living in the shadow, and she is basically someone whose entire life has been kind of second fiddle to the grief her parents feel for their dead child. And like, that's a very, very like rich field to mine for drama. And the movie does, to its credit, mine it pretty well. Because when Lucy is back in 2003, she's interacting with her parents, and she is not only interacting with her parents, but she's interacting with a version of her parents that she has never known, because that version of her parents have a daughter, and it's like they're not marred by tragedy. So it's an interesting way to have Lucy kind of witness what her parents could have been like for her in a kind of slightly derogatory sense, kind of what they could have been for her had they not had the grief of their dead child weighing them down throughout Lucy's entire life. So it's an interesting, almost like It's a Wonderful Life sort of thing. But it's an interesting kind of thing where Lucy is seeing a version of her life through Summer, like how her childhood should have been, by seeing how Summer is interacting with her parents. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff there that I found really interesting. Like, there is, there's a way that she's kind of like, experiencing her parents through that. She talks about like how, oh, they have family dinner. Like, she's asking them like, how, like, do you guys have like a family dinner every night? And then her parents are like, yeah, and usually Summer helps me cook every night, and it's really great. It's my favorite time of the day is when I get to cook with Summer. And then they throw it back at Lucy, not knowing that Lucy is their daughter in the future. And they're like, do you have family dinners? And she's like, no, we never have family dinners. So it's a really interesting, just kind of way to see how like the unbroken version of your parents could have been or were before you came along. And it's not to say that Lucy is responsible for like how kind of not great her upbringing was, but it's just that they experienced such a tragedy that they couldn't overcome it, and it affected the way that they raised her. So seeing that through the lens of a time traveler going back in time and sort of just witnessing and having conversations with her parents at a different point in their lives, that is the richest part of the movie. That is the best part of the movie. It's not enough to make me raise the rating any higher than 1.5 stars, because the rest of the movie is pretty much garbage. but it is something I do recognize and appreciate and respect in this movie, because I do think it's an interesting way to utilize the time travel format. And if I could go back and talk a little bit about the nostalgia of it all and the depiction of 2003, like, the nostalgia of it hit me pretty well, because I was a teenager in 2003. I was a sophomore, junior in high school. Yes. And like, I was there. like that is the depiction of my formative years as a teenager was in 2003. And it was kind of trippy and entertaining to see the way that like the styles were shown, like fashion styles, and the way that people were acting. Like it's very much like a 2024 vision of 2003. But it is pretty close. It's pretty close. It's pretty solid. The biggest downside to that is that it lasts all of like 4 minutes. So Lucy travels back in time to 2003, and then she goes to the high school because she is like, well, I need support. So she had a teacher that was also, like, it's established that he was teaching there 20 years ago. So she goes to see him. And like, as she's going through the school, she's seeing like all of these 2003 kids and like all of these, like these fashion senses, like rolling shoes or whatever, and people talking on flip phones and the fashion and everything. And it's all scored to a Hillary Duff song from early 2000, or the early 2000s. Aptly titled So Yesterday, by the way. And that was a kind of trippy scene, but it's just a montage just to establish it. And then after that, there's really not much in terms of nostalgia for 2003. There are a couple, like, it kind of devolves into really just kind of hacky dialogue that's like Lucy kind of stands up for a kid who's being bullied or what have you, and he's like, hey, thank you for that, but I don't need anyone to fight my battles. I don't need a girl to fight my battles. And then she says, at my school, everyone would have taken a video and you would have been viral on Twitter. And like, that made me roll my eyes, because like, I hated that, because the next line is the guy saying like, what's Twitter? And it's like that is just like the laziest joke you could do in this type of story. But then the more I also thought about it, I did kind of rationalize it, or I did kind of grow to accept it a little bit, because I thought, well, Lucy is like a 17, 18-year-old girl. She has been alive 17 or 18 years. She's traveled back in time 20 years. Like, maybe that is just genuinely, like, she just genuinely thinks that, hey, you know, Twitter existed then, probably. So I don't know. But either way, that it didn't really work, because it was like a very, very lazy piece of dialogue. And it kind of recurs a little bit, in a little bit of a better sense, when there's a scene that involves the dial-up noise for a modem to get on the internet. Like, that's funny. Like, that's done a little bit better. But it just seems like they didn't really work too hard at punching up the sort of time displacement dialogue as much as they should have or could have in the movie. So that was a little bit of a bummer. There is a level. There was something else I was going to talk about before that, but I can't remember what it was, so I'm going to scrap that. But anyway, that's what it was. Oh God. Okay. There are a couple of instances of egregiously done product placement that goes nowhere. It's really weird. Like Olive Garden and Butterfingers. Those two brands apparently paid enough money to be very prominently featured in this movie. And it's like, the movie doesn't hold your attention that much, but it loses what little attention it can grasp by showing like having a scene where Lucy is talking to Quinn, played by Griffin Gluck, where like the scene stops and like Griffin Gluck's character Quinn is like, do you want a candy bar? And she's like, oh yeah, that's my favorite. And then he's like, well, this is my last one. And then, or something like that. I don't remember what it was. And I just saw it today, but then he's like, oh wait, I have more. And he has like a big, like family size Butterfingers thing. And it's just prominently in the center of the frame. And it's like, fuck off with that. Like, I get it, you know, capitalism, art and commerce, all of that bullshit, but god damn, just disguise it a little bit. Like, do something creative with the product placement. Don't just have it there. And then there are a couple of scenes in Olive Garden that are just very much like Olive Garden. Like, the servers at Olive Garden in this movie have speaking roles and reference Olive Garden. It's that bad. So that just really, that took me out of the movie quite a bit when I saw it. So aside from that, I do want to touch on something that I did appreciate about this movie and think was done very well. It is there's some LGBTQ elements to the movie. So Summer is a closeted lesbian in the movie. And I found it really interesting the way that Lucy and Summer kind of bond and they become friends. They're sisters, and they become friends. And like when the other shoe drops and Lucy is telling Summer about, like, telling the truth about, you know, I'm a time traveler. I'm here to I'm trying to get back to 2024. Like, it's so interesting because Summer is like, well, what's my life like in 2024? And like Lucy has to lie because she doesn't want to tell her, like, hey, you get murdered in a day or so. So she says some things and like she she doesn't know that Summer is a lesbian. So like she says something that gives her pause. And I was just like, that is some really interesting like dialogue there. And that's some really interesting storytelling to have like a character not know how to navigate a lie about the other character who is concealing a part of herself. And it's just an interesting way to kind of have them bond a little bit more and to just create like a little bit of dramatic tension because you have a character who's lying about the safety of another character and being caught in that lie without even realizing that she has tripped herself up because she's not aware of Summer's sexuality. So I thought that was really well done and really interesting. And so I don't know if I really have much else. I will talk in a roundabout way about the kind of killer reveal, the motivations and stuff. I'm not going to give anything away, but I will say, as I said before, it's pretty lame, but it does get points for being something that I wasn't necessarily expecting. But also it doesn't really do much with it. Like I feel like it's trying to make a statement and trying to be interesting for for a certain contingent of, maybe not contingent of Gen Z, but like it is not even a rip from the headlines thing. Well, maybe now, but like it is like it's a societal statement. I will say, and that's all I'll say about it. But it's interesting to see that kind of play out. But by the end of the movie, it doesn't do anything with it. And in fact, the actual resolution of the movie was something that kind of bothered me a little bit because it just seemed like very much like the movie was presenting itself, like some interesting elements of itself in an interesting way, and then decided in the end to wrap it up in the most direct and like laziest way possible. So it just seems like it could have further complicated itself. It could have further made it a more dramatic sequence for like a series of choices for characters. But instead it's just like, well, we'll wrap this up in a bow and we'll call it a day. And that was just kind of a bummer. So yeah, I think that's all I've got to say about Time Cut. It is on Netflix. It premiered on October 30th. I will say Totally Killer is probably the better movie of these two similarly themed movies. But yeah, I don't even remember. I don't even know if I really liked Totally Killer all that much, but it was better than this because even though this movie does have some interesting ideas at play and does do some interesting things with those ideas, it still didn't really work all that well for me. Yeah, I rated Totally Killer 3 stars on Letterboxd, and I recorded something on Patreon about it, so check that out. But yeah, Time Cut, I rated 1.5 stars. Wasn't really that good. We'll probably never see it again, but I can't even really recommend it. It wasn't that good. So if you see it, let me know what you thought of it, and hope you like it. That's as much as I can say about that. So that is it for the secondary review. I am going to do a quick potpourri section to kind of wind things down here. Of course, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, first of all, thank you. And if you are listening to the podcast from like Threads, because I've been posting a bit more on Threads, let me know. I'm always thrilled when people kind of start listening to the podcast. It's also very nice to know that. So if you like, shoot me a thread, like message me on Threads, or like thread me. I don't know what the word is there, but I'm post a thread about it. Share it on Threads. There we go. Share the podcast on Threads and tag me. So username is Obsessive Viewer. But anyway, if this is your first time listening, Potpourri is the section of the podcast where we kind of wind things down and share our thoughts on things we've watched lately, things we're looking forward to, whatever we want, as long as it smells good. It's the Potpourri section. And for Potpourri, these are just micro reviews to kind of wind down the episode. And I mentioned last month or so that I am kind of playing catch up because in September, unfortunately, my mother passed away, and I took some time off from the podcast. And oh my God, saliva got stuck in my throat. I'm so sorry. I took some time away from the podcast. Some episodes kind of slipped through the cracks in terms of episode, like movies that I was going to review on the podcast. So I'm kind of playing catch up now that I'm back from my bereavement, and everything is going less horrible than it was in September. And so I bring all that up. That is a whole preface that I've brought up into this episode, because the first thing I want to talk about on Potpourri is another Netflix movie that came out on September 20th this year. It's His Three Daughters, which I, in the moment, rated 4.5 stars. That might change if I ever see this movie again. I'm not sure. But the context. First, let me just explain. The premise for His Three Daughters, according to IMDb, is this tense, touching, and funny portrait of family dynamics follows three estranged sisters as they converge in a New York apartment to care for their ailing father and try to mend their own broken relationship with one another. Director and writer for this movie was Azazel Jacobs, and the cast includes Carrie Coon, Natasha Lyonne, Elizabeth Olsen, Rudy Galvin, and Jose Phoebus. And so I bring this up because I watched this movie. I watched this movie the night before my mother's funeral, and it was an incredibly effective movie because it was depicting an experience that I have now gone through twice in my life. Both of my parents passed away from illnesses that put them into hospice care. They had in-home hospice care. They had, so my dad passed away in 2016. My mother passed away in September of this year, and they each had ailments that had in-home healthcare, in-home hospice care, and this movie, His Three Daughters, is depicting that. It is depicting that three estranged siblings coming together to basically bring their father comfort in as he passes into the next, into the afterlife, into death, transitions out of life, basically. And so watching this, it was incredibly effective to me because I, like an idiot, watched it the night before my mother's funeral, about a week after she passed. And it just had a very profound impact on me because this is a very raw, emotional, like incredibly well-written and acted display of grief of all kinds. And it's so fascinating to see it play out because it is just so truthful and honest. Because when you're in that situation, like, I don't want to say too much, but basically, like, I mean, there's like with any family dynamics, there are issues that come up. There are issues, there are things that people don't like about one another. And when we're in a very frayed mental state because of the grief that we're collectively experiencing, it's like a fight or flight thing. Like you can either steer into like the conflict that you have within the family, or you can set it aside and, say goodbye to a parent that's dying. And I'm proud to say that, like, with my mother's death, like my family came together and I felt like everyone did great. And it made it a much less, much less stressful experience, I'll say. But those, like, that, the different ways that people deal with grief are just really, it's really great to see it displayed in a movie like this, that's displayed in such a truthful and honest way. I forgot to mention that Giovanna Depo is in this movie as well, and he's phenomenal. He is fantastic in, like, the 2 scenes that he's in, and, like, it's just so interesting. Like, this is a really interesting and compelling movie. It's a very dramatic, beautifully done movie. It's kind of all mostly contained within the confines of this one apartment. Unlike the movie here, which was garbage, this makes great use of a single location for the most part, and does some really interesting things to make it feel like almost like a stage production, almost like a theatrical production. But, like, there's some interesting things that happen in the third act that kind of bring home, like, it brings out the inner pain that these women are feeling into the prominent, like, almost like it's not a fourth wall break, but it's kind of like a reality break in this movie. And I think it works incredibly, incredibly well. And it leaves on such a just breathtakingly great depiction of grief in a really, really amazing way. It's really fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and just read my Letterboxd review, because this is all stuff that I have from like 2 months ago, and that was when I was in a very frayed mental state. So this is what I wrote on Letterboxd when I saw it on like the 26th of September. So I wrote, my mom passed away a week and a half ago, and I decided to watch this the night before her celebration of life service. It was probably not the best decision my grief-stricken mind has come up with, or maybe it was the best decision for me, seeing as seeking catharsis through movie watching has always been a big coping mechanism for me. Shocker. I say all this because my feelings about this movie are very much rooted in personal experience, not just from the very recent loss of my mom, but also my dad's passing in 2016. Both of my parents passed away in in-home hospice care, much like what this movie depicts. Actually, exactly as this movie depicts. I know I'm just repeating stuff I've already said on the podcast. I'm sorry. And I'm going to continue reading. His Three Daughters is an incredible depiction of grief in the extremely fragile and sometimes volatile way it can be expressed among a family all going through the same ordeal. The 3 leads are astounding and give performances that could have easily felt melodramatic, but instead are subtle and measured, so the bigger personality of one character doesn't outshine the other, more reserved characters, and vice versa. I was also really impressed with Giovanna Depo's performance and how the movie treated his character. There's so much power in his defense of Rachel, while also expressing his own grief and anger. There's just so much nuance and substance to that character, and I think the movie handles it perfectly and with just the right amount of presence. The sibling relationships themselves also rang extraordinarily true and resonated with me. And again, it was handled with such care and attention in the script and performances that I'm just kind of blown away by how raw and truthful the simmering conflicts were throughout it. I definitely have a lot of feelings about this movie that I'll continue to sort through once I have a clearer head, but I really loved and cherished this experience in my own way, as it obviously really resonated with me. And so I kind of read that mostly to jog my memory a little bit. I'm kind of proud of like the Letterboxd review I wrote. I don't want to see how many people have liked it because it's not a 1-sentence shitpost, but I want to touch on Giovanna Depo's performance here in his character himself, because he is, in the movie, he is, I think, Rachel's boyfriend, played by Natasha Lyonne. In the dynamic of the movie is that Natasha Lyonne's character, she is kind of like this, the perception her sisters have of her is that she is this kind of like stoner, kind of loser who lives at home. And the truth of the matter is that she has taken care of their father And she's been the only one to do that. And while she has been the only one to do that, Giovanna Depo has been bonding with their father, while the other two sisters have been absent and have not been in contact. So, what I really loved about the character played by Giovanna Depo is that I don't have his name here, so the character's name, so I'm sorry. But what I loved about that is that the movie depicts his grief as something that's as powerful or as resonant as the sister's grief, because he's been there. He has love for the man who's dying as well, and I think that's just such a tender and nuanced depiction or nuanced angle of grief and family grief, even when it's not family blood relatives that are grieving. So I really loved it. I really loved His Three Daughters, and it is on Netflix. And I'm going to stop talking because there's a lot of stuff there that I'm still going through stuff, guys. So that's His Three Daughters. It is on Netflix. I highly recommend it. So the next thing I'm going to talk about for Potpourri is Speak No Evil. It was in theaters. Everyone saw the trailer so many times, and now it's on digital, I think. It is on digital. I don't think it's streaming for free anywhere, but it is on premium VOD, I believe. The premise, according to IMDb, is a family is invited to spend a whole weekend in a lonely home in the countryside, but as the weekend progresses, they realize that a dark side lies within the family who invited them. Director was James Watkins, and writers were James Watkins, Christian Taldrup, and Mads that's Taftrup. I believe those are the writers of the original film that came out in 2022. It was a Danish thriller in 2022. And this is the kind of Americanized remake. It stars James McAvoy, Mackenzie Davis, Scoot McNairy, Aisling Françoisi, Alex West Leffler, and Dan Hof. And this was a very solid remake of the Danish thriller from 2022. And I'm not going to spoil it at all, but I'm not going to spoil either version of it. But I think that there's such an interesting thing to kind of examine with these two movies when you kind of look at the Danish original and the American remake. And I think that there's some interesting elements to that, where if you watch the Danish original, it is dark, it is grim, it is the tension and fear and thriller aspects of it are steeped in legitimate fear and horror and just darkness and this despair. And the American version, it follows it pretty closely, but where it diverges from it is in this American thriller way. And by that I mean that there is a lot of figuring out what's going on and fighting back and going into big conflict, angry things, big set pieces of emotion. And all that is really effective, but having seen the Danish original, it just feels it feels very Americanized it feels very much Americanized, parentheses, derogatory. Because I think that there is a certain level of uniqueness to that Danish original. There's a unique flavor to that fear that's depicted in the movie, that thriller aspect that's depicted in the original movie, because it's set in this sense of despair. And I can just tell that Americanizing it, making an American remake of it, I feel like the choices that were made for the finale of this movie that differ from the choices of the original were probably not something that was a creative choice so much as a marketing choice, so much as a kind of how are we going to tell this story in a way that is going to be more enjoyable for American audiences. And enjoyable is how are we going to make it be more exciting and less despair and less completely just horrifying in terms of just senselessness and horror, basically. So it does lose some points with me for kind of diverging in such a strong way, because I feel I feel like they could have done the Danish version of this movie for American audiences, and I feel like it would have been celebrated, or would have been kind of like it could have been something that would have been celebrated as something unique to American audiences. But instead, they kind of went the safe route, and I've already kind of forgotten like elements of it. I think the performances were good. James McAvoy doing the whole James McAvoy crazy person thing, I think he did great. I know people are a little tired of that style from him, but I mean, it's the same sort of thing that he did in Split. Like, he is like an unstable person who is just kind of constantly on edge, and the other characters kind of have to navigate around that. Yeah. And there wasn't quite as much in the movie to make the other characters uncomfortable. Like, there's a certain level of just complete discomfort in the Danish original movie that is touched on a little bit in this version, but not as much as I would have liked it to be, because it should have really, really played up that level of just discomfort that the other characters experienced. So unfortunately, it doesn't really do that, but I did end up rating it 3.5 stars. So it's a solid thriller. You might get some enjoyment out of it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it well enough. So that's, what is it called? Speak No Evil. The movie that you saw the trailers for in every movie that you saw from spring to summer 2024. Speak No Evil. It's on VOD now. Check it out. Let me know what you thought. And to round out Potpourri and to round out this episode, I'm going to share some very quick thoughts on the movie Slingshot, which came out in August. That may have been when it came out on PVOD on VOD. But Slingshot is directed by Mikael Hofstrom and written by R. Scott Adams and Nathan Parker. And the premise, according to IMDb, is an astronaut struggles to maintain his grip on reality aboard a possibly fatally compromised mission to Saturn's moon Titan. And the cast includes Casey Affleck, Lawrence Fishburne, Emily Beecham, Timur Capone, and David Morrissey. So here's the thing: Slingshot piqued my interest because I'm always on the lookout for sci-fi movies of all stars and stripes, but like space sci-fi movies also very much catch my eye. And Slingshot is that. Like, this is like a haunted mind sort of movie. Instead of like a haunted house, it's like a haunted mind. And it doesn't borrow heavily from 1408, but it is interesting because Mikael Hofstrom, he directed 1408, which before like the Flanagan Assance and before the Stephen King Assance, even in terms of adaptations. Also before the It remake, 1408 was like the highest grossing Stephen King adaptation. And that's because it's a self-contained thriller. It plays with space in some interesting ways. It's about a writer who is experiencing like some very, very crazy hallucinations, like questions of his reality. And it's a really effective thriller. Tiny and I reviewed it on Tower Junkies. It's a great thriller. It's a great novella as well, or it might have been just a short story. I think it was a short story. So that's all great. But what's interesting here is that Slingshot borrows a lot of elements from 1408. The way I wrote it on Letterboxd was Mikael Hofstrom basically takes a lot of elements from what he did successfully with 1408 and throws them into a Solaris package that doesn't quite fit. And I stand by that as kind of just... as much as I kind of hate that sentence, like, it just seems like so hokey, like what a douchebag critic. Like Michael Hofstrom basically takes a lot of elements from what he did with 1408 and throws them into a Solaris package that doesn't quite fit. Fuck off, Matt. Anyway, so but I do stand by that sentiment because that is kind of what this movie is. Slingshot is about Casey Affleck's character kind of having a potential mental breakdown, and the other two people on the ship with him kind of reacting to that and trying to help him kind of work through that and be not a threat to the mission. And it's all kind of going along as a it's kind of chugging along as the movie is depicting them about to do a slingshot kind of maneuver in space around I think it's around Jupiter to get to Saturn. And so it's like a very precise maneuver that they have to do in order to make it to their destination. And so as the fragility of the mental state of John, played by Casey Affleck, deteriorates, that is a risk to the mission. And like, that's all fun. That's well and good. That's solid. That's interesting storytelling. But unfortunately, it just doesn't really connect as well throughout the rest of the movie. In fact, it shares a lot of similarities to some specific Twilight Zone episodes as well, but like, I don't know, it just seems like, and I wrote this in my Letterboxd review, but it seems less like the movie is paying homage to those things and more like the movie is just lacking in originality. Like, it kind of feels like those sort of, like the Twilight Zone episodes that this is harkening back from, it's multiple episodes. It feels like at some points, the filmmakers like recognize that and are leaning into that as homage to the Twilight Zone. And at other points, it's like, wait, do they know that this is what happens in that Twilight Zone episode? Or are they just like thinking that this is clever, even though it's something that was done 60 plus years ago on television? Is it not as well done because they don't know that it's already been done, or is it not as well done because they're just paying homage to something that's done it better? I don't know, but overall, I was pretty disappointed with Slingshot. It did not hold my attention that well at all. It could have been more interesting in a variety of ways, but it just didn't really. It didn't really work for me, and mostly it's the performances. I also wrote on Letterboxd that the performances are really flat for a trio isolated in space losing their sanity story. The stakes are incredibly high both inside the ship and outside, but the performances and overall pacing didn't get the memo. Again, fuck off, Matt. Jesus, why was I writing in such a douchebag critic voice? Oh my God. Anyway, I'm cringing so hard at that. But anyway, but yeah, it just felt like the momentum of the story was not matching the momentum that should have been imbued in the characters as they were playing out the plot of the movie, essentially. So that's Slingshot. It's on VOD now. Wasn't a fan. I rated it 2 stars on Letterboxd, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. And actually, I'm going to do one more because I know that I have one more potpourri here on my list. So I'm going to go ahead and just roll with it. The last potpourri for this episode of The Obsessive Viewer is for Amber Alert, which is on VOD. It was released in theaters and on VOD on September 27th, 2024. The premise, according to IMDb, is a rideshare turns into a high-stakes game of cat and mouse after it follows a car fitting the description of an Amber Alert. Director was Carrie Bellessa, and writers were Carrie Bellessa and Joshua Oram. And the cast includes Hayden Panettiere, Tyler James Williams, Kevin Dunn, Seda Erika Aculano, and Kurt Oberhaus. And I wrote on Letterboxd, I'll just say really quick, what I wrote on Letterboxd was, I'll give it this, the script is fairly earnest and there's a decent, if melodramatic story somewhere there. But there are a ton of plot contrivances and bonehead character actions that made me roll my eyes to the point I was afraid they'd fall out of my head. Again, fuck off, Matt. You're like, God, I don't know what mode I was in to have such a like very, I don't know. I was being colorful with my Letterboxd reviews. Anyway, Amber Alert is actually a remake of, I think, a 2013 low budget indie movie from the same filmmakers. And here's the thing. They had, I think it was 2013, but if it was, they had 11 years. I don't know how they could have gone this long between the original version and this version without thinking through some of the plot contrivances. I don't know how much of it is the same as the original version. It could be a completely different movie for all I know. But if, like, here's the thing. These filmmakers, these writers, these filmmakers this is their second go at this same story. If this is the best they could do on a second go round after so much time had passed, it's a shame because the movie is not good. I rated it 1.5 stars. There's so many like little bits and pieces that just fall so flat. Like I will give one example. It is presented as a very like high octane, intense, like road movie that's a thriller, which works. Like this is the type of movie that would harken back to like early 2000s like thrillers, like Cellular and Phone Booth. Like those kinds of movies are what this movie is kind of aspiring to be, which I respect and love that for it, because I think like those movies were fun. Those movies are a freaking blast. But you have to kind of create you have to create a level of disbelief that isn't going to cause you to like freak out or what have you. Like you can't have the audience bend over backwards to suspend their disbelief in certain aspects. So I'll give one example, because to be completely honest, I've forgotten a lot about this movie. But one example I will give is that the guy who has abducted the girl, he is being chased by the two people in the Uber, Tyler James Williams and Hayden Panettiere, Shane and Jack. And they're pursuing him, and they get his phone number, which no salt there. Like the way that all happens, that's fine. But basically they're in contact with him. And there is a scene where, oh my God, where the guy throws out a decoy body. And it is the most egregious use of like it is clear, like it is clearly a mannequin. And I'm not saying that as like, oh, the prop department failed. I'm saying that as in the confines of the movie, in the reality of the movie, this man threw a mannequin out of the car. That is what happened. That is what we are led to believe in the movie. That is what actually happened in the movie, is that the character threw a mannequin or doll or whatever out of the window of the car so that the people pursuing him would think that it was the girl that he abducted and that he is just killed. That is what that is what the reality of the movie is. What I hated about that was it is so absolutely clear that that's what it is, yet the characters stop, and it's like they are on a desolate road they're in Kentucky / I think Indiana a little bit, but they're in Kentucky, and it's like a straight shot, like rural area. There is no other way that this person, there's no way that this person could have lost them. Yet they stop the car, and it's like there's numerous beats where they see the body in the road, and it's several seconds for them to think oh, we've lost and everything. It's the most contrived, very, very, very much oh my God, everything's the worst. This is terrible. But it's it's a mannequin. You can see it's a mannequin. Get back in the car and chase the guy. He's a mile ahead. You can still see him. Why are you standing in the road looking at this mannequin thinking we just lost to this mastermind? You can still see him because it's a straight shot and there's no other car on the road, and it's a straight shot for miles. It's maddening because the movie expects us to play along with that and suspend our disbelief, but it's so contrived and hokey that it sucks. It sucks as an experience. And that is one example of several that happen in the movie where that same sort of thing happens, where that same sort of contrived dramatic tension moment happens, and it's really lame. It wasn't good. I rated it 1.5 stars because one of the things I was afraid of going into it was I was afraid that it was going to be like this big panic thing with I was afraid that it was going to turn into this human trafficking thing that's all the rage now and really doesn't fit with reality. And I do give this movie points for not steering into that. It does, like, the motivation for the abduction and everything, like, it has its own thing, and like it works fine enough. Like, it's okay. But it's something I wasn't expecting, and I do give it credit for that. So I rated it 1.5 stars. It's Amber Alert. It's on VOD now. Check it out if you want to or not. I don't recommend it. There are much better things you can do with your time, like subscribing to the podcast and checking out Patreon as well. And that brings me to the end of this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. That's it for this week's episode of The Obsessive Viewer. As always, thank you so much for listening, and make sure to follow the show on social media and subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast app. And also check out the Obsessive Viewer podcast's other shows, which are Tower Junkies, a Stephen King podcast hosted by Tiny and myself, and Anthology, the Twilight Zone and classic sci-fi podcast hosted by me. Also, I do want to mention that once again, check out Odd Trilogies tomorrow. I'm going to be a guest on an episode on Odd Trilogies talking about Kurosawa. So check that out when it goes up. Also, Andy, my friend Andy Carr, who is part of Odd Trilogies, he posted what they're calling Odd Thoughts. It's a solo thing, him breaking down his experience at the Alamo Drafthouse media preview event. So check out what he has to say over there on oddtrilogies.com. And also, don't forget to check out The Waiting Game on November 20th, I think. Was that? November 21st at Indian Lake Country Club. So check that out. So next week on the podcast, you guys are getting a bonus episode on Sunday. It's me and Tiny reviewing the Speedway Murders, which is available on Hulu. Watch it, listen to our bonus episode. We spoil the hell out of it, and we talk about how it's a connection to us being from Speedway. So check that out. And then next week on the main show, I'm reviewing A Real Pain in Blitz. So check that out. And thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. And now, enjoy this short clip from a recent Patreon-exclusive episode. For the full episode and more Patreon-exclusive content, sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. So there's been like a lot of reactions from people online saying like, well, you know, it's in a bad part of Indy. It's in a bad area. Like, I don't want to go there. It's in a bad area. It's like, you know, it's probably not that bad. Like, you're just white and you live in Carmel. So it's... Honestly, I'm pretty proud of that. I'm kind of pissed that that's behind the paywall. But thank you for listening to the Obsessive Viewer podcast. This episode was produced and edited by me, Matt Hurt. If you have feedback, thoughts on our episodes, or just want to connect, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. For more information on this show, including a full archive of our episodes and show notes, visit obsessiveviewer.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please give us a follow on social media and subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. Also, consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible to help increase our visibility and grow our community. If you want to support the show and get early access to new episodes, as well as a steady stream of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. For information on more podcasts presented by obsessiveviewer.com, visit obsessiveviewer.com/podcasts. Our theme song is A Little Mad Sometimes by As Good As It Gets. For more of their music, check them out on Spotify and at asgoodasitgetsmusic.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Get up to 2 months of free podcasting service with Libsyn. Check out the show notes for your promo code to get started podcasting today.